Welcome to this explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're joining us today because, well, we're going to unpack a daily phenomenon that I guarantee you, or at least someone you know, deals with all the time. Picture this, right? You've got a massive deadline looming, you need absolute laser like focus. So, what do? Do you retreat to a perfectly silent room, shut the door, and lock yourself away? Or do you pack up your laptop, walk down the street, and voluntarily dive headfirst into a chaotic, noisy room full of clinking mugs, hissing espresso machines, and dozens of overlapping conversations? For a huge number of us, that second scenario is literally the only way to actually get things done. Today, we're exploring the architecture of coffee shop concentration. Okay, let's dive into this, because on the surface, this is a total paradox, right? Why does chaos create focus? I mean, common sense tells us that if you need to concentrate, you should eliminate every single external distraction, period. Yet you'll walk into bustling cafes packed with students, writers, and remote workers, and they are completely dialed into their screens, totally oblivious to the absolute swirl of activity around them. How in the world does the clattering of dishes and the loud hum of a barista steaming milk actually help someone concentrate better than a perfectly quiet room? Well, to really understand this, we have to completely reframe how we think about focus. For years, people who needed to work in coffee shops were told they just kind of lacked discipline, or, maybe they just wanted to be seen working. But psychology tells us a totally different story. This isn't about lacking discipline at all. It's actually a super fascinating neurological solution. You see, a perfectly quiet room doesn't always equal a quiet mind. Actually, scratch that. For a lot of people, a quiet room straight up amplifies internal chaos. Conversely, that noisy coffee shop, it acts as a clever tool to actively distract the brain's overthinking mechanism. So let's look at the first key to all this: silencing the inner voice and overcoming that chaos. Now, what's really interesting about this concept is this psychological truth. Silence amplifies an overactive internal dialogue. Think about highly imaginative, mentally active, or, let's be honest, anxious people. They frequently experience a fast-moving, incredibly loud internal monologue. During a busy day full of errands and meetings, external tasks keep that inner voice busy. But the second you put that same person in a perfectly quiet room with nothing but a blank document, bam! All those external distractions are gone. Suddenly, all those unprocessed thoughts, the mental to-do lists, the random anxieties, they rapidly bubble to the surface and become absolutely deafening. And that is exactly where the environment steps in. The ambient noise of a coffee shop gives the anxious part of the brain just enough to listen to. Think of it kind of like turning down a blaring radio dial. That low-level, non-threatening external stimulation acts like a chew toy for the anxious, easily distracted part of your brain. By keeping that restless part of your mind busy with the background chatter and the soft jazz music, the logical, problem-solving part of your brain is finally free to step up and actually concentrate on the task at hand. But, this phenomenon isn't just about the noise in the room. Which brings us to number 2, anonymity, emotional control, and psychological safety. Think about it. When you sit in a quiet office or even a strictly silent library, there's this immense amount of silent pressure. In those spaces, every sigh, every stretch, every single time you pick up your phone, it feels like it's being judged by your coworkers or peers. There's this heavy expectation to perform and just look productive. But in a chaotic coffee shop, everyone is a total stranger. Nobody cares what you're doing. There are absolutely zero expectations from the people around you. And honestly, this brings us to a really validating point. That lack of social expectation creates a profound sense of psychological safety for your nervous system. You get to feel completely secure and hidden in the crowd. You get the warmth of human presence, the vibe of being part of a community, but entirely without the emotional exhaustion of actually having to interact with anyone. You aren't burning any mental energy managing social dynamics or stressing over office politics. You are wonderfully, safely invisible. And this anonymity, it literally protects our mental energy. Moving on to number 3, emotional and cognitive buffers and how they calm the mind. So, for a lot of people, complete silence is actually interpreted by the primitive brain as a threat. Historically speaking, if the forest went completely silent, it usually meant a predator was nearby. Today, complete silence can just feel incredibly isolating, and it triggers the anxious mind to start searching for problems. Without any input, your brain just starts filling the void by replaying negative scenarios from the past or worrying about completely hypothetical problems in the future. So, the crucial point here is how we counteract that threat response. The steady background hum of a public space acts as this brilliant psychological buffer. It's a constant stream of proof to your nervous system that life is carrying on normally all around you. People are laughing, coffee is being poured, the world is safe. This naturally grounds your mind right in the present moment. Instead of spiraling into future worries, your nervous system just calms down, anchored by the safe, predictable reality of the room you're sitting in. Let's look at number 4. Preserving cognitive energy for true cognitive focus. Now, all of this emotional regulation requires a ton of energy. Forcing focus drains that energy rapidly, especially when your brain is fighting its own internal chaos. If you force yourself to sit in a silent room when your mind is racing, you're essentially going to war with yourself. You have to actively suppress your internal monologue, constantly fight off distractions, and forcefully direct your attention. And wow, that takes a massive toll. It is absolutely exhausting. By the time you actually sit down to start writing that report or coding that software, you've already burned through half your daily cognitive reserves just trying to get your brain to sit still. But by letting the environment do the heavy lifting, you completely change the game. By allowing the background noise of the cafe to safely occupy that easily distracted part of your mind, you literally stop fighting yourself. You preserve that incredibly valuable, highly limited cognitive energy for the actual work, the high-stakes problem solving. So you see, utilizing background noise is not a sign of weakness. It's a highly strategic way to prevent mental fatigue before the real work even begins. But that begs the question, why do we so often prefer going back to the exact same noisy space? That leads us to number 5, the cue to work and familiar spaces.
And this brilliantly illustrates why we do this. Returning to the exact same table day after day relies on a core psychological concept known as the mere exposure effect. By definition, this effect states that the more we experience something, the more comfortable and favorable it feels to us. When you return to the same coffee shop repeatedly, you are actively relying on this psychological phenomenon to hack your own productivity.
Over time, the specific sensory details of that environment, the smell of roasted beans, that indie playlist they always have on, the warm lighting, they all become deeply familiar to your brain. What might be a totally chaotic environment to a first-time visitor becomes a predictable, safe sanctuary to you. These sensory inputs create a super stable baseline. Eventually, simply walking through the front door and smelling that espresso acts as a powerful Pavlovian trigger. Your mind is automatically cued. Okay, we're here, we're safe, and it's time to get to work. You don't have to force the transition into a flow state. The environment just magically initiates it for you. Finally, number 6, your resourceful brain and finding a perfect balance. Let's move on and see how this all builds together. When you look at all these mechanisms working in tandem, a really clear picture emerges. We've seen how the environment occupies the anxious brain, how the crowd creates a safe anonymity, how the ambient noise calms our nervous system, and how the familiar space automatically cues our focus. Needing a noisy coffee shop to focus doesn't mean you're easily distracted. It doesn't mean you're unable to work efficiently. On the contrary, it means your nervous system is incredibly self-aware. It is simply your brain's natural, totally resourceful way of finding the perfect balance of stimulation. You are intuitively building an environment to turn down the volume of your own chaotic thoughts so that you can finally hear your own best ideas. So the next time you have a massive deadline looming, ask yourself, is the silence actually helping you, or is it time to go find your focus in the chaos? If you enjoyed learning the hidden psychology behind this everyday behavior, please make sure to subscribe, because once you understand how the mind really works, you begin noticing the absolute genius behind the things you and the people around you do every single day. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.